This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and fashion. I'm Nick Manise. On today's program, science fiction and design collide as we blast off to the Vitra Design Museum. We also talk Singaporean design and planning, and, as it's summer, we head to the garden to discuss the work of Dutch landscape architect Mien Ruys. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. The genre of science fiction has inspired writers and filmmakers for over a century, and it's fueled the imagination of designers too. In fact, there's so much to it that the Vitra Design Museum has dedicated an exhibition to the subject. This show's producer, Maylee Evans, teleported to the museum and sent us this report.
Science fiction started off as a literary genre in the 19th century, with stories like Journey to the Centre of the Earth from the likes of Jules Verne. With the advent of film, cinematic renderings of the future soon followed, turning these visions into visuals. The mutual relationship between science fiction and design is at the core of the Vitra Design Museum's current exhibition in Weil am Rhein, Germany. Pulling together examples from the museum archives, science fiction, designed from space age to the metaverse, showcases furniture ranging from the early 20th century right through to contemporary designs, and some made purely for the digital age. I caught up with Suzanne Gran, Head of Collections and Archive at the museum, and one of the curators of the show.
With this exhibition, we try to follow the path of how science fiction and design have influenced each other, and based all the objects coming from our collection, we try to tell the story of the, the last 150 years.
How has our vision of the future been shaped by design?
For us, this topic of the mutual influence of design and science fiction has fascinated us really from the very beginning. Because design classics often appear in science fiction films, providing a backdrop for this vision of the future, and at the same time, also in science fiction, in literature and films, inspired the designer to create these forward-looking and futuristic designs and design settings. And many ideas, especially for technologies, are first described in novels, video calls or holograms, or even the term metaverse.
Imagine yourself as one of the crew of this faster-than-light spaceship of the future.
These first, more or less mental adventures into space were characterized by a thirst for adventure and the idea of conquering the space and encountering alien species.
You travel deep down into the heart of the forbidden planet to discover the incredible marvels of this lost genius race.
But given the political situation in post-war Europe, many films of the 20s and 30s raised questions about how people were to live together in the future.
Will this be humanity tomorrow and the years after?
Things to Come from 1936. It's a film about the question of political rule and social oppressions.
Well, they're rioting. It's barbarism come back again.
But they smash up that infernal gun, then honor is satisfied and you needn't go.
They won't smash the gun.
Over the years, these topics have evolved. And nowadays, they also include issues like the impact of artificial intelligence, ecological disasters, or even the aftermath of wars. I think sci-fi films, or even the literature, became more and more dystopian.
Hello, Hal, do you read me? Hello, Hal, do you read me? Do you read me, Hal?
Affirmative, Dave. I read you.
For many, the words science fiction and design might conjure up interiors from blockbuster films. The genre has proved a playground rich in possibility. Furnishing a new planet or a spaceship allows the opportunity to conjure up new worlds and ways we might live. Think of the plush chairs of the French industrial designer Pierre Paulin that are scattered across the Star Trek universe.
Commerce is our goal here at Tyrell. More human than human is our motto.
Or the high-backed Argyle chairs of Rennie McIntosh that found a home in Blade Runner. the Ovalia egg chair that the actor Will Smith just can't quite get comfortable in sci-fi comedy Men in Black.
Your boy Captain America over here. The best of the best of the best, sir. With honors. He's just really excited and he has no clue why we're here. That's very funny to me. Y'all ain't laughing though.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
And of course, there's 2001: A Space Odyssey.
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
Released in 1961, Stanley Kubrick's cinematic classic is filled with organic, upholstered shapes, bold colours, which reflected the space age and design innovation of its time.
During the so-called space age, an incredible amount was happening in design. It was dominated by the spirit of innovation. New materials like plastics, new shapes, and also new ideas about how people would like to live or live in the future. The designs by Olivier Mork, whose Gin series was featured very prominently in 2001: Space Odyssey, or the designs by Giocolambo or Geolenti.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Even the futuristic living utopias by Werner Panton or Luigi Colani, they all wanted to rethink the way we design our everyday environment and away from that kind of classic wooden table with chairs around it and towards more flexible, more organic living units.
I've still got the greatest enthusiasm and confidence in the mission.
These ideas may have fallen out of favour, but in more recent years, thanks to advancements in AI, VR and the digital sphere, as well as the start of space tourism, a second space age is upon us. Processes like 3D printing and computer-aided design have allowed technology to open up design possibilities and catch up with what once seemed like fantastical science fiction concepts.
With the help of these new technologies, reality has caught up with the ideas of science fiction. Finally, at least. One of the most impressive examples is certainly the sketch furniture series from the Swedish design team Front. It was designed in 2005. All designs are drawn in air with the help of a digital pen, and then the data is processed by the computer and forwarded to a 3D printer. Even today, it sounds like an experiment, but it has shown how technical progress actually can influence the design of today and even the future, of course. With the advances in VR and AR technology, the boundaries between the science fiction and design are becoming, of course, increasingly blurred. Designers have actually more tools at their disposal to create kind of immersive experiences. What is interesting for me that it's regardless of where I live, my social background, or the social structures. Both genres, science fiction and design, are also, as always, increasingly addressing ethical issues, like forcing designers to consider the ethical implications of their work, such as the impact on our environment, of course. These gives rise to kind of new ideas, and working, for instance, with mycelium or algae, it's just as futuristic today as it was working with plastic in the past. A good example of this is also the Overstream project by Studio Forma Fantasma. It kind of addresses the downside of our digital enthusiasm. Like their load share is kind of a result of their exploration of strategies for reducing and recycling electronic waste.
The digital world is becoming more prominent in conversations about design. It's an avenue that many creatives are exploring or perhaps designing exclusively in. In this world, the laws of physics or limitations due to material or production processes no longer apply. So what does this mean when it comes to science fiction and design?
It's an interesting question for us as curators, because I think that is something you have to ask the designers, actually. As a museum, we are more on the kind of collecting and observing side. What we can see is actually with projects also exhibited in that exhibition, speaking about Mike Woodbridge project, for instance, it's a fashion project. He works with AI to create kind of artificial images of him, in a way avatars, but they really look like kind of the real persons. But if you take a closer look, that there are some distortions and that there are some physical rules that could never be applied in the real world. For him, as a designer, it is important to see this digital space also as a part of his identity. As a queer designer, he often feels like an alien, and he says this digital space gives him a new freedom, introducing himself as a person who has different aspects or different personalities. So it's part of his identity in a way.
Whether the next generation of designers turn towards a digital sphere in the years to come, or, as we hope, continue to produce in the physical realm, it's clear that the relationship between science fiction and design will undoubtedly continue. For Monocle in Weil am Rhein, I'm Maylie Evans.
Science fiction design from space age to metaverse is on display at the Vitra Design Museum in Weil am Rhein in Germany. It runs until the 11th of May 2025. Next up on today's show, I'm joined in the studio by Monocle's Naomi Xu Elegant to discuss some projects featured in Monocle magazine's July-August issue. Naomi, that's on newsstands now, and I want to start off with the Park Connector Network Plan, which Singapore is looking to complete by 2030. I mean, it sounds ideal to me. It sounds amazing to me, the headline. But tell us a little bit about the significance of it and how the project has developed.
I think everyone, when they think of Singapore, has in mind, Marina Bay Sands, those really futuristic, tall skyscrapers, and of course, the incredible density of the place. But actually, it's super, super green, and they're only trying to make it more green. This Park Connector plan, which has been years in the making, the goal is for every resident to live within 10 minutes walk of a park. And by walk, it's not just, walking on a car-filled highway on the side of the street to get there, but actually like a fully pedestrianized network where you can never see a car. It's biking and jogging, and it crisscrosses the island. I think by 2030, they want 500 kilometers worth of parks.
That sounds amazing. It's funny you mentioned Marina Bay Sands there, which is this iconic structure. A couple of years ago, I tried to walk out of that structure, and I basically couldn't find a place for pedestrians. And I think maybe that is a challenge that Singapore does face. It caters really perfectly for cars, and it's got an amazing transit system, but sometimes I think walking feels a little bit disconnected. I think that's what is so admirable about this project. I mean, the key word for me is, I guess, network. So it's all well and good to maybe have a path that can cut north to south through a neighbourhood, but you really sort of need those east and west. You need to be able to give people walking options, which it sounds like they're working towards.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people have that idea because it is what you experience when you come in as a tourist, that sort of downtown core is very car heavy. There's a lot of skyscrapers kind of looming over, whereas, the rest of the 90% of the island for residents is very green, a lot of tree-lined avenues, but they do need to bring it more into the core as well so that even the most urban bits still feel green and natural and enjoyable on the human scale.
What I also like is the fact that obviously there was some public consultation that went into it, and it sounds like that's a thread that seems to be running through urbanism projects. There's also a public ideas contest to redesign Singapore's Tanjung Pagar station. Tell us a little bit about that. Is that something you had input as well? Were you asking for a kiosk or a liquor store to be installed in this newly designed station?
I mean, they're taking submissions and there's prize money, so maybe I will put together some kind of proposal. But no, this is one of the things I'm most excited about. It's not going to happen for a few years, but it's the plan to redevelop. It's this beautiful old Art Deco train station. It opened in, I think, 1932, and it closed about 15 years ago. But they want to change it now. It's not a train station anymore. They want to make it some kind of multi-use, open to the public place where people can gather. And I think the intention is definitely to have at least, because it's 7 hectares, it's a huge space, both the building and the space surrounding it. There's room for parks and retail and restaurants and, even schools and other public facilities. And that's very exciting. They're offering prize money for, you don't even have to be an architect. So maybe we should work on one together. I don't know. The liquor store.
Maybe we should. We can expand. We can build an empire.
Monocle office.
I mean, I said expansion there, and this is one station, but it is part of a wider trail network. Tell us a little bit about this corridor. Have you walked along it? Is it a place where people in Singapore spend time?
It is, yeah. It's a funny story. It actually is. It's basically an old railway that goes from the north to the south of the island. It used to connect to Malaysia, and it's completely undeveloped primary rainforest in some parts. And the only reason that even exists is because Malaysia actually owned it. And it was kind of this weird strip of land within Singapore that a different government owned for a long time because they ran the railway until 2011. And because of that, it was never developed during Singapore's crazy push to build more housing, which is ongoing. But luckily, almost before they kind of had conservation at front of mind, this piece of rainforest was accidentally preserved. And now that people are much more into nature conservation and kind of natural hikes, it's there for us. There's lots of nice birds.
Yeah, I think these sort of accidental moments are incredible. I mean, it always kind of reminds me of the High Line in New York, which is sort of that big high-profile urban infrastructure project that got left behind. And maybe if that had been bulldozed, we wouldn't have this incredible linear park stretching through the city. And it's a similar thing happening here in Singapore. I mean, I'm also curious, is there, I guess, a design dialogue in Singapore? Do people really respond to these, I guess, public call-outs? Are people actually contributing? Is this something you talk about with your friends when the government puts out a call for ideas?
Definitely. And this isn't the first time they've done a public call-out. The rail corridor actually has various sort of nodes and little other disused stations, and people have contributed ideas before. The enthusiastic response of the public is, it's amazing. The moment these parks open, they're swarmed with families and joggers and cyclists. People just fill the space that you give them.
I want to change gears here. We've gone from, I guess, public-facing projects to more privately led ones. Well, that's where we're going right now. I want to talk about the Air Circular Campus and Cooking Club, which is a new dining project from the Bali-based Potato Head Group, which I'm a big fan of. I really love their work. I've seen images of this new campus. We've published it in our Monocle on Design newsletter. It looks like it would be swarmed by the public because it looks like an amazing destination. I mean, you've been there. Tell us a little bit about the significance of this space and this building to Singapore.
Yeah, it's great. It feels very un-Singaporean when you go because it's tucked into Dempsey, which is this very green, again, undeveloped area. Like when you're at the campus, you can't see any buildings anywhere. So, it doesn't feel like you're in the city at all, which is sort of remarkable. But it used to be a sort of officers' colonial club in the 70s. And the whole intention with the project, the restaurant as well as the architecture, was to kind of minimize environmental impact. So they didn't just bulldoze and then build like a fancy new building and add solar panels to kind of offset, all the damage. They tried to do sort of minimal intervention, kept a lot of the old structure. There's this cool spiral staircase at the back, and it's very open, so you don't have to use air conditioning because there's a nice breeze. It gets a little hot, but I like the tropical heat.
Absolutely. And it was, I guess, the renovation was led by the Dutch practice OMA, who is an amazing, amazing architecture studio. The reason we wanted to finish on this is, I guess, to pull a thread that runs through this whole thing. The architecture, the urban design, the urban development in Singapore seems to be really driven by a connection to the environment and an awareness, I guess, of the role that architecture in our public space, or the relationship that architecture and public space has with an environment like you do have in Singapore. It's a climate, I guess, that people can lean into. Is there a broader trend across the island with people moving away from, I guess, boxy glass towers that rely on air conditioning to keep them cool? Is there an embrace of, I guess, the natural ecosystem and the microclimate?
Very much so. And I think with these projects, the moral kind of is that people will use the space that you give them. If you build the glass boxes and pump up the air conditioning, then that's what people are going to live in. But the fact that everyone's responded so positively to both public and private projects like this, I think really shows that people want the more open air feeling. Nowadays with public housing as well, a really common design feature that I love is, for example, if you have a 40-story skyscraper, which many of the public housing blocks are, every 15 floors, I believe, there will be a huge outdoor public garden. And that's just a common space for residents to meet. And I think that should be a thing everywhere. It might be harder in London where there's not that much nice outdoor weather.
I would take leafy, green, verdant spaces,
it'd be nice, right?
Regardless of the weather. Naomi Xu Elegant, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle on Design.
Keen to understand what makes our cities tick? Why do some flourish where others fail? What makes Barcelona bounce while San Francisco struggles? You're not alone. Monocle's quality of life focused July-August issue is out now. Under the covers, you'll spy our annual Quality of Life Index, ranking the 20 best cities to call home, and nearly 300 pages of sunny features, urban benchmarks, and ways to cool off this summer. Plus a big party in Bali, Perth's best-kept secret, and an alluring new bolt hole in the Algarve. The bumper July-August double issue of Monocle is out now. Subscribe today so you never miss an issue at monocle.com/subscribe.
The Dutch landscape architect Mien Ruys was a household name in her homeland in the 20th century. This is thanks to her work in translating modernism into garden design. It's an approach that saw her consistently collaborate with architects to bring clean lines and geometric shapes to unruly plots of the outdoors. Significantly, she also pushed for collaboration between architects and landscape architects to begin from the initial design of a project. Now, in a bid to extend Mien's notoriety beyond her homeland, author and garden designer Julia Crawford has released a book. It's called Mien Ruys, The Mother of Modernist Gardens, and is published by Lund Humphreys. To find out more about Mien and her significance, Julia joined me in the studio, where I began by asking why the designer's work was so significant.
In terms of her reach and her lifetime, she was very keen to help the ordinary gardener. She would write in newspapers, in magazines. They actually sold gardens through department stores.
So they sold garden designs?
Yeah. So like a border design, certain number of plants, it would be a certain dimension, and you could go into this department store and buy it off the peg as a design. So she was very much a kind of promoter of design for all. And in terms of her influence now, I'm hoping with the book that, it will reach a new audience of people within this country that haven't heard of her. There's things in people's gardens that they probably don't even realise were her creations or were her inventions. The railway sleeper. She was the first person to use a railway sleeper in the garden. And that came from the fact that in parts of the Netherlands, the soil is very sandy. And one of her architect friends had built a house in the dunes, and the sand was encroaching on the house. So she, at the time, used to travel a lot by railway, and she knew of this problem, and she could see all these timber sleepers that were being taken out and replaced. So she knew there was a surplus of sleepers. And you have to remember, this is post-war, so materials are really scarce. People are having to innovate to find new materials and new ways of constructing things. She came up with the idea of using the sleepers to hold back this sand dune. And, well, I suppose you can say the rest is history in that so many people have timber sleepers in their garden now.
From leafing through your book, there's also other parts, like she was very big on desire lines, introducing diagonal lines that cut through a landscape or a garden rather than the traditional sort of boxy right-angled paths. Why hadn't that been pioneered before? I mean, that's such a seemingly obvious thing. Why was she at the forefront of so many of these things, and why was she developing them?
Previously, people tended to stick to the orthogonal in the right-angled grid or right-angled plan. We also need to look at it in the context of the De Stijl movement. So Mondrian and Theo van Doesburg, those painters, if you think of their classic paintings, they are a grid of rectangle squares. At some point, Van Doesburg introduced a diagonal line into the composition, and this was a revelation. And all of those Dutch movements were influencing each other. So there is a connection to that art movement. And I think she was a person who understood the way that users use the space. So as human beings, we quite like to be lazy. We like to cut a corner. We don't want to go the full straight ahead and then right, or straight ahead then left. And quite often that's a diagonal line. She understood that that's how people use space, and therefore made life easier for everyone by actually putting those paths in rather than letting people be dictated, but also the plan be ruined or navigated later on. She knew people were going to do that, so it kind of made sense to her.
Yeah, why not design for them anyway? I mean, you mentioned the end use, and from what I'm picking up from this discussion, it sounds like she was really concerned with not necessarily just creating a beautiful place, but also really serving the people she was working for, whether that's creating off-the-shelf gardens that you could roll out anywhere on a suburban lot or a small city garden, through to incorporating these desire lines, these diagonal lines. Do you think that was also significant? Until that point, were people creating outdoor spaces for the common man and woman?
I think there was more of a top-down approach previous to that. I think planners and architects wanted to dictate much more how people were going to use the space. She was the start of a movement that people wanted to be much more from the user's point of view. So the diagonal lines being one of those examples, but also from a planting point of view, understanding which plants people would be able to look after. How are they going to look in 10 years' time? Just understanding the process of time on a space as much as the aesthetics. They were very important aspects for her.
Was she willing to let her creations evolve with time? It's quite a significant thing for somebody to do. You put plans in place, but being willing to let them go, whether that's to the mercy of nature or to the people who are looking after them. Was that built in? Is that something that she was aware of?
Definitely. She was so experimental in terms of her own gardens that she worked in and developed alongside her designs. She had this series of gardens that over time she tried things out, and then if she didn't like it, she was never afraid to take it out and do something completely different or rethink it in some way. She was very open-minded in that fact and accepted that change would happen. And of course, in a garden, in nature and in an outdoor space, things do change, things grow, things die. There's an ecosystem there that's affecting each other. So if you lose a big tree, for example, that'll have a massive effect on the plants that are underneath it. She understood that. And I think one of the issues they have now at the gardens, they have 9 protected gardens. And it's difficult to know how to take care of those because they're not museum pieces. They are going to change. It's difficult for people who are in that situation that are trying to preserve them, but also look to the future.
The other thing I found curious about her work is the fact that she seemed to collaborate really closely with architects, not just creating a landscape in isolation. And I think the reason that this spoke to me is, frustratingly, it still feels like lots of architecture is created without consideration for the landscape that it's going to sit in. It just is made and then the landscape is added to pretty it up. Why did she recognise that there needed to be a bit of give and take between the built and designed landscape?
Part of that modernist ideal was that one influences the other, that they should be done hand in hand. They were very strongly advocating trying to bring nature indoors or bring light indoors and trying to open up people's dwelling places in particular to nature and to the outside world. So their way of dealing with that was to collaborate very early on in the process so that you have somebody on board that is an expert in dealing with outside space and understands how it works. She also had some architectural background because she'd done some architectural studies as well. So she was well regarded and well respected by her peers. It meant that further down the line, you didn't end up in these situations where the landscape architect is thinking, well, why have you done that there? They were able to overcome those problems early on in the process and build successful projects.
I'm curious what some of the lessons there could be for designers today. What are some of the big takeaways from your wider research that a landscape architect or even an architect practicing could incorporate?
Well, definitely the collaboration part, I would say, is a key part of how she operated. In terms of her legacy, her dedication to what she believed in terms of designing for everyone. I had this really interesting chat with a lady who had worked with her, and she said that she treated every single project exactly the same. Doesn't matter whether it was a tiny terrace garden or whether it was a large master planning project. It was all approached in the same way. It was all given the same amount of value. And I think that's a really admirable quality. Something to learn from. I think those are 2 kind of key things, especially for landscape architects and architects. I suppose in more general terms, she educated a whole generation or several generations of designers in the Netherlands. Some of her books are always referenced by any Dutch designer you talk to. They were quite often at key moments in their lives or in their education, which inspired them to then become designers or become landscape architects. She has definitely inspired at least one generation of people.
My thanks to Julia Crawford there. Mien Ruys, The Mother of Modernist Gardens, is published by Lund Humphreys and available at all good bookstores now. And that's all for today's show. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans. I'm Nick Manise, and you can reach me on nm@monocle.com. Thanks for listening.